Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of AI and the Future of Law. I am your co host, Jen Leonard, founder of Creative Lawyers, joined as always by the fabulous Bridget McCormack, president and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. Bridget and I are thrilled to be joined today by two of our favorite thought leaders in legal, Jae who is co-founder and chief growth officer of Lumio, and Ilona Logvinova, director of practice innovation at Cleary Gottlieb. Hello, everyone.
Hello, it's so good to see you.
This is gonna be so much fun, you guys. Thanks so much for doing this. It's gonna be a really, really fun conversation.
This is going to be a party. I can already tell. And we are going to kick it off with our AI Ahas segment, which has been co branded, tip of the hat to Ilona's colleague, Megan McMillan at Cleary. AI Ahas are our segment where we hope to inspire people in legal to be using AI in lots of different ways in their lives, personally and professionally. So we want to hear how each of you have been using AI. And we're going to kick it off with Jay to tell us, what have you been using it for in a way that you find particularly delightful these days, Jay?
Super fun one. Are you ready? So it is a custom agent with custom instructions. Not very long, but you know how everyone's been complaining about how GPT writing style is so fake and it sounds like AI. I actually the instructions are all about tone and voice. And I use it as I don't know if everybody here is familiar with the Key and Peele segment, Obama's anger translator, Luther. So it's a reverse Luther. So I type in super angry emails and then it just spits back to me lovely, gracious, patient emails. But that's my AI aha.
My gosh, that's amazing. I love that. Alona, what is your AI aha?
I'm really inspired by that. Mine's going to be a lot simpler, but it's so effective. So on the professional side, right, every day for work. So I'm constantly on calls. A lot of my day is taken up with calls, right? And you're going back to back to back. Those of you who know me, you know that I start my calls 5 minutes after the half hour or the hour, right, to give yourself that little buffer room. And I take a lot of notes during my call. So I'm always in OneNote taking notes, right? And I'm constantly now using Legora, which is our, partner platform internally, our all-purpose platform. And I'm always taking my notes and I'm, prompting and synthesizing them and then taking action items or, executive summaries from my notes. And then in that 5 minute buffer in between my calls, I can then send those notes out, right, incredibly quickly right after the call, and then it's done, right? So you don't have that running to-do list through the day, but you have your instant takeaways. And I prompt it several times to say, what are the takeaways? Did I miss anything in terms of my takeaways? Is there anything that's inferred that I should make sure that we do, right? So just generating insights based on the notes I've already taken. And it's just a closed workflow loop that's beautifully efficient. And so I highly recommend it. On the personal side, so my daughter's 9 years old. She's very creative and she's always drawing things. So we spend a lot of time, doing art projects and drawing things. And she's always asking what she should draw or what she should create or like scenes, right? And so I'm always asking ChatGPT what we should draw and how, kind of creating with ChatGPT and figuring out what we can put pen to paper on. And that's been a lot of fun. She's like, Mom, stop using ChatGPT. We should just talk. And I'm like, no, but this helps us be more creative, right? It's a creative agent. So now she's gotten really excited by it too.
Aw, I love that. I also have a 9-year-old daughter, and she also loves to sort of ask ChatGPT for inspiration and then go write stories and draw too for fun.
Those are both amazing. I feel I need to go back to both though. Jay, did you create it in on ChatGPT's platform? Are you on OpenAI's platform? Okay, so it's a GPT basically that's doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually I used GPT to help me with the tone and voice analysis of the outputs I wanted. I gave it some samples of emails that I thought were particularly kind and gracious and patient and still
Yeah.
concise. And then, it took me down a whole rabbit hole of like what are the components of voice. And then so it helped me like tighten the system instructions. Yeah.
Awesome. And Ilona, did you why do you take your own notes instead of just letting an AI take notes? Because you're going to take better notes and so then it can create
Exactly.
better. Yeah.
Where we can, I do use it, but I find it, it's my own takeaways. It's not the whole meeting, right? We all know how this kind of works. You're taking the strategic parts away from the conversation. And then the goal is really to figure out, there should never be a meeting without action items is my perspective,
Yeah.
right? So if there's not an action item that's drawn from the notes, that's also a problem. So that's actually also, that helps me elevate that insight as to, was this an effective meeting? Did this make sense, right? Could this have been a Teams message or an email, right? Instead of a meeting in the
Yeah.
first.
That's super interesting because aren't we all trying to figure out which of our meetings can be emails or
Yeah.
Teams messages? Yeah. Yeah.
I love that though. I think that sometimes I see a lot of people, even people who are very into AI, exploring, like thinking a lot about it. Like sometimes they're not really intentional about who should take the pen on the first draft of anything. I think, it's not a monolithic, like one or the other is the right answer. I think it's application specific. And I really like the idea of, us doing the first run of the notes because I've generally been unimpressed with the call recording transcript derived notes. And then you end up, I think, maybe spending more time weeding out like the mischaracterization, or sometimes, they don't actually understand what you're talking about. I think that's brilliant. I'm going to try that.
Small hat goes a long way. Yeah.
I really liked that recent the one useful thing blog post that Ethan Malik put out, the think first, write first, meet first idea. I was playing around on a writing project this summer, and just out of curiosity, I asked Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT just to write this article that I was writing. Like, I gave it prompts and I gave it context, and I think I might have engaged deep research first. And I was not really impressed with the first draft, but I was curious to see whether it would be easier to try to edit from a first draft than to write on my own first. And I ultimately found it much more frustrating to write that way than to think it out first and then sort of use it as an editing partner. So Ilona, I can totally see the benefits of taking notes yourself and then trying to capture the takeaway. And Jay, I could actually see the benefit of using Ilona's emails to train your agent. Ilona writes the world's loveliest emails, and I wish I could write like her with her tone. The world should capture that.
Yeah, I can confirm. I can confirm. She is the world's most gracious email writer. Hey Jen, I tried the first draft of the writing also because I still write quite a bit. Um, the thing I found most helpful actually, and what I've been doing recently when I have to draft stuff is to get AI, whether it's GPT or Claude, to interview me. Like I just give it the topic. Yeah, give it the topic and the audience, and then I like act like a reporter or act like a student or act like someone in the audience. Like, what do you want to know? Ask me one question at a time. Or I say, like, give me 5 questions. Then, it's more of a brainstorming exercise because I find that just like I was saying about the being intentional who takes the pen on the first draft, I think sometimes when we jump to the final deliverable or the output that you're trying to create, you don't get the best results working with AI. I think being a little creative, open-minded about the production process gets really good results for me.
I love that. Do you always type with it, or do you use voice mode ever for the interview?
Ed Sohn, who's our head of product and one of my best friends, he has been reminding me to use voice mode for like a year and a half now. And for whatever reason, I'm a typer. I'm a typist. That's just me.
Even when you have your phone, like if you're walking around and you want to continue the conversation, even on your phone, you're typing. Interesting.
Yeah, because well, I am now what they call an elder millennial. Hashtag magic millennial. So one of my like work flex moves was sending these like perfectly formatted emails sent from my iPhone, and you guys know because I blow up your phones all day with text. Like I am a furious texter. So even on my phone, that's kind of what's most natural for me. I tried voice mode, but I think it's also that I don't like waiting for it to speak back to me, and I don't love like recording voice notes myself.
It's interesting. I love the multimodality of it because one thing that I've realized since I don't work in an organization anymore is that I really crave conversations like this with really smart people because I think I learn as I talk out loud. And so I love voice mode because I really do think I make connections that I wouldn't make through typing. So I think I'm going to try your approach, Jay, and interview with voice mode to see what happens.
That makes a ton of sense. Actually, I am an internal processor. I think by writing, like I always have in my whole career. Ed's very much an external processor. And I feel like external processors love voice mode, but I love multimodal AI. It's
Yeah.
just what I love are the photos. Like I love taking pictures of things when I'm walking around the world. I have tried the, take a picture of what's in my pantry and my fridge and like what can I make?
Mhm.
That's like amazing. So I love yeah, and I will scribble things on, Scratchpad and then like take pictures of it. I love that. But the voice mode is just it's not my jam.
Yeah, no. But that's why it's cool. It's like a Swiss Army knife. Well, thank you so much for your ahas. Those were fantastic. So, moving into our conversation about the profession, and actually, we're going to turn to Bridget first to kick us off on the conversation about the future of the legal industry and all the change that's ahead of us because of AI. And of course, as the audience knows well, Bridget has been leading an AI transformation at the American Arbitration Association for going on 3 years now, Bridget, which is amazing and hard to believe, I'm sure. And you have talked at different times about the innovator's dilemma and the challenges of driving change within a highly successful legacy organization. So, could you kick us off and talk a little bit about the challenges and the value of growing organically versus some of the values of inorganic growth and some of the values of bringing in different components to allow you to grow in new ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I'm most interested in hearing Jay and Ilona's reactions to all of it and advice and counsel because we're so lucky to have them. So I won't talk for too long. But and I think Jay and Ilona know some of the story. But the AAA is going to turn 100 years old in 2026, and it's a well-run business that provides dispute resolution services around the world, and a lot of them, like we do over 500,000 cases every year. So we have an awful lot of expertise. We have a lot of information that isn't really found anywhere else. And so it seemed to me like every part of the legal profession, this one too is pretty ripe for disruption by AI. So we had to figure out what is that going to look like in an organization where most people have worked here for a few decades, which is part of why it's successful, right? Like part of why it's successful is we have these experts who have been around for a long time doing excellent work. But when you do like any legacy successful organization, it's really hard to pivot to do something that might disrupt what you're doing today, right? So that obviously is something you need a real plan for, and change management is part of that. And in my view, inorganic growth had to be part of the solution. It's not the whole solution, but it had to be part of the solution. And so I don't know, Jay, if you know the story. So the AAA did its first acquisition in 100 years last year. We acquired a little Silicon Valley startup that does online dispute resolution, which is a big term that can mean a whole lot of different things. But the point is, they were operating in a way and in a space that we were not yet operating in. And which isn't to say that the talented people I work with couldn't. Of course, they could. But by bringing in this new business, they remain actually a for-profit subsidiary of the nonprofit parent. They could operate as a tiger team in building and standing up new services for new markets. And then we could learn from each other. There would be all kinds of synergies, and we could be able to deliver some of the services and products of the future in more experimental and quick ways, right? To get like quick feedback from users in the market on those. At the same time, we were doing, a pretty pretty significant transformation, as Jen knows, who's told the story for us beautifully, with the core team. And in my view, that's gone maybe better, faster, because we introduced, a new team with a new culture, and we were able to learn from one another and also support one another in places where each of us was not as strong. So there's a lot more I can say about it, but I know Ilona and Cleary have some experience with this as well. So I'd love to hear your take on it, Ilona.
A little bit of experience, one could say. But Bridget, I love hearing your story, and this is really only the second time I've heard you talk about it. It's so inspiring to me because it was such a great idea, right? And the idea that you are taking you're taking an organization that has done something extremely well, right? At the top of you are the best at what you do in your industry, right? And you really looked to just modernize it, right? And what I think is so interesting and important about inorganic growth is not just bringing new capabilities into an organization, but it's the opportunity to bring a whole new culture, right? A whole new way of working, a new operating system internally into an organization. And of course, once you do that, right, you are giving an opportunity for the acquiring organization to learn from that new entity and to learn the systems and the ways and the approaches of the new entities. And we can talk at length about integrations more broadly when it comes to M&A, right? And where they fail and where they do well and what that looks like. But in my mind, and I've seen a number of integrations in my professional experience now through the different organizations that I've been with. But the integrations that are truly successful are the ones where that parent organization, the acquirer, really takes on the culture of that entity that they're acquiring, right? And they invite them in and they learn from the experience. And it seems like, from what I've heard from you, it seems like you've really done that and you've allowed that transformation to take shape pretty organically through inorganic growth. And we have certainly tried to do that with the acquisition of Springbok AI, which happened about 4 months ago in March of this year. And the idea was really, it was a similar perspective, right? We have a craft that we do well, right? As Cleary, we have expertise across industries, across regions, but the legal profession is changing, right? That's what we're all essentially talking about here today. And that's what you and Jen, that's what both of you talk about on this podcast, right? And understanding that to be true, what is it that will help us change, right? What will help us transform? And so the vision for bringing in Springbok was really to embed data analytics into the way that we're working and help us work differently and really enhance our client service from the inside, right? From the start of the workflow to that client delivery. So it's really been an exciting journey, and it's been a fantastic integration, really, because I give a lot of credit to the firm and to our leadership team for inviting this new culture into our culture, into a culture that was already great, but recognizing that it's not that we need to change, right? But that it's that we have an opportunity to transform, which I think are two different things. And the latter, if you really get it right, I think it can really benefit from that invitation to understand and align with a new culture that's brought in.
Amazing. And Jae, you have the opportunity to have a little bit of a bird's eye view of what's happening all across the industry. What are your takeaways about combining different forces for growth? What works well? What doesn't work well? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think that one of the shifts industry-wide that I'm seeing that I really like is, I think, a change in tonality and a change in posture and attitude toward innovation and new things. I think that there is much, much broader recognition now than maybe 10, 15 years ago about the benefits and the opportunities that are afforded by new ways of thinking, welcoming new and different capabilities into the organization. And I'll take us back quite a bit to my time at Seyfarth. And Seyfarth was very early in doing a lot of this thinking, and Seyfarth had subsidiaries in adjacent businesses. So Seyfarth Shot Work was quite an older business, actually. I think they had started that in the late 90s, and it was a training arm, which made a lot of sense with the employee relations and labor and employment practice group of the firm, and then Seyfarth Lane Consulting, which was ahead of its time, really, because it was designed to help corporate clients kind of make the jump to digital business and different ways to engage with their providers, as well as service model innovation for the firm proper. So I think when I think back to some of the work, the culture work and the communications work that I did with Steve Poor, I was so lucky to learn from his years of experience and his wisdom. The respect for what exists, I think it's very important that the innovators bring that to the table. Um, and I think it is really a new idea in the world, because if you go back through the intellectual history of innovation, like the older idea, like from the 1940s, is creative destruction, right? That's what Schumpeter called innovation, that new things were always going to happen in the world and that it would destroy or displace old things. And I think that's an adversarial dynamic that maybe, got scaled through the sassy magic of Silicon Valley and this all this talk of like moving fast and breaking things, right? I never thought that that was appropriate for the law. We are talking about law firms that really created the regulatory legal framework of this country. There are firms here that are older than these United States. And there are firms that, kind of lay claim to really important legal innovations, like the holding company, like the bankruptcy practice, like the trust indenture. There are lawyers and law firms that help build all of that out, right? So I think the people trying to improve the practice of law really have to come in with some recognition of what has happened in the last, not just 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, but it's also that the people who have been there doing amazing work understand that new and different capabilities sometimes they are necessary and sometimes they are transformative in how the firm can dispose or discharge its core purpose. And then so turning everyone's attention to, why does the organization exist? Who are we serving? What are we meant to do? Like, what are we all trying to do here? And what are the best available ways for us to do that? What does, a new acquisition or a new group or a new capability, how does that change our ability to create value for our stakeholders, for our clients? And I think kind of giving people a shared purpose is super important. And now I think, that innovation has certainly moved up market. There are many people in innovation leadership roles at some of the most profitable, oldest, whitest of white shoe firms here in New York and certainly in London also. I think that culture work is much, much further along than, what I saw in the industry 15 years ago. In terms of acquisitions, I think that the strategy part of it needs more thinking, though. I think that, it's not just an emotional, cultural distinction, whether you're trying to displace, the way things are done or to enhance them or to create entirely new ways of doing old things, or are you going to try to do new things, new value propositions that you haven't attacked before, right? I think there are strategy implications as to whether you're going after hours displacement or, kind of outcome enhancement for the client, or creating new service lines, new service delivery models for existing revenue streams, or are you trying to open up new revenue streams to address new needs that you haven't served before? I think that level of strategic thinking seems to be lagging some of the investments, which is not surprising, but I think that in the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of old established legal businesses really lean into that thinking about, how do we monetize these investments? How do we reach that, not only problem solution fit, but product market fit, right? Who are we trying to serve with what offering? So I think that's probably what's coming next.
So this is sort of like stemming from advice that you gave me as a solopreneur, but at scale. So you told me when I started a business, you said people will tell you need to focus and don't be swayed by that. Experiment and see what you enjoy doing and also what is profitable. Do you think law firms need to focus on one of those different strategies that you mentioned, or can they experiment with different things and try to do many things at once?
Amazing question.
I was just thinking it's such a good question.
So I'm going to start just as a joke with everyone's favorite lawyerly answer is it depends, but I will follow up. I think I think it's an iterative process. So where I think firms need a focused lens first is understanding their current assets and liabilities. And I mean strategic assets, strategic liabilities. And the reason I think that is more important for them than you and me, Jen, when we were solopreneurs or, like founders or entrepreneurs starting new things is that they are encumbered by an entire kind of history of accumulated choices. They do have a lot of stakeholders in it's not just a business. Absolutely, some of these most profitable firms in the world, they already run like businesses. Like the idea that they don't, I reject that entirely. But they're also social and political entities with a lot of stakeholders who have a lot of stake in the system, right? So I think that it's important for them to take stock of their current position. Where are they strong? Where could they be better? Where could they maybe kind of, pull back past investments and redirect that to, new directions? I think the focus mindset has to start with where they are now, the organization's current reality. I think when it comes to the organization's future aspirations, it's extremely important for leaders to help people switch their mental context, the emotional context to exploration so that people can learn about emergent horizons, new possibilities, and like create new thinking, new framing, new ideas, right? Because what's the Einstein quote? Like, we can't solve problems with the same mindset like we had when we created them, right? If you want people to be innovative, if you want people to have new ideas, sometimes you have to take them out of the office, put them in a new physical space, even for a day. You have to expose them to new ideas and new stimulus, right? So I think in that opportunity scanning, it's really important to be exploratory. But the synthesis of the two, I think, is immensely important because the question really becomes, what are the new possibilities where we are better positioned than other organizations to, go after those, right? Because opportunity doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, you really do have to take a disciplined, focused lens to what your assets and advantages are, and then evaluate the whole, kind of universe of possibilities as against that lens, right? Which are the right best opportunities for us that we really can't miss? Like, we have to take a swing. Which opportunities might be a reach, and which are truly distractions that are going to really hurt our chances of succeeding at these other things where we are well positioned, where the strategic advantages are mission critical to our future advantage.
I love all of that. And I just, as you were talking, Jay, I was thinking about how important it is to think about the value proposition of what we're delivering, right? Jen, I think I heard you say this first, that the law as an operating system has not had a refresh in quite a long time, right? And one of my favorite quotes, I think it was an Ethan Hawke. It was a TED talk, and it was about how, creativity is not a luxury, it's actually sustenance. And it's a beautiful TED talk. I highly recommend if you haven't seen it. But I think it's the same now for our profession, right? And for firms who are looking to stay ahead of the curve and ahead of, the changing industry. We need to understand, what is it that our clients are doing? How are they working? How does that inform our delivery model? Because exactly to Jay's point, right, nothing exists in a vacuum. And so when we're thinking about delivering value, it has to be derived from what is our best and highest form of advisory. And what does that advisory look like? And it probably won't look the same as, or it ought to not look the same as it's looked, right, for the last number of decades, because we don't have that sort of long form attention anymore, right? People don't want to read 40-page memos. People want data visualizations. They want interactivity, right? They want, immediate sort of accessibility of bullet point information. And that's a very different delivery model than what we've been used to in the legal profession. And that takes different tools. It takes a refreshed workflow, right? It takes a different type of training. Maybe the pricing model is different, right? Maybe there's tech on the front end. I certainly hope there's tech on the back end, right? But all of this means that the way that we're doing it is different. And I think the really exciting piece right now is figuring out what that different means and what are its component parts, and is it modularized, and how do you assemble it, and how do you make it, fit for purpose across your practices and your regions so that it best serves your client.
I mean, you guys are all experts in this, but the barriers to doing all of that for busy lawyers are, I mean, they're infinity, right? Lawyers are too busy to make time for that. They're trained to think that they can't experiment with creativity, right? That's actually part of the training, the part of what they're taught. They're doing quite well right now, right? That even though everybody's been talking about how law is ripe for disruption with AI, it looks like profits are okay in the big firms, right? So they're doing, so there's reason for them to be skeptical, and there's lots of reasons for them not to make time or space for the kinds of work you two are suggesting they need to do. Are you seeing them do it? Like, is anything changing yet? Or do you think this is all still to come and there'll be, some wake-up calls that force it?
I can kick us off maybe, and just with a very short snippet, without giving away too much. I'm starting to see it change. I don't think there's a sea change just yet, but it is, I'll say, as an innovation leader, as someone who's focused on this is very much something that I'm thinking about constantly. And this is the vision state, right? This is on the vision board in terms of what we're doing and what we're setting up for so that we can deliver differently. It's the why. And even if it's not fully here yet, right, that is what we're driving towards.
Some of it is going to be depressing. I think I think it depends who you mean by they. Like, who is they, right? And there's a lot of ethos that goes into innovation forums, and the kind of people who dedicate their entire lives to innovation. I think they do bring very strong ethos to the challenge. But I think when you look at markets, the pace of adoption of innovations is quite practical. I think that commercial enterprises adopt innovations when it makes financial sense to do so. And then, so I think that pockets of the industry have been under greater financial pressure in terms of rates, pricing, margins. They went first. I think we can clearly see that in some of the ways that service models have changed for legal work that I would say is like core minus, closer to commoditization. I think you certainly see that, if you go back to the dot-com bubble, like right after the dot-com bubble, offshoring was in kind of centers like in lower cost regions of the world. That was very new, and that's standard practice now, I think, for global organizations. If you look at some of the back end processes that go into ESI handling, that was very new, and we had to have the Sedona conference, and we had to have some lawyers, very few lawyers, focus really hard on that, right? And then once they figured out a scalable methodology, businesses just sprang into being. And those founders ran very hard to make e-discovery a huge segment. LPO's the same, ALSP's the same. A lot of the work that you see in contracting. Now, does that affect the ivory tower profitability of some of the oldest firms in the world? Not yet. But and I think here's where like Christensen's model of the innovator's dilemma, it always holds true, right? Innovation does start in the lower end of the market, and then it does move up market. I think we're seeing that up market move right now. And as somebody who paid for college being a secretary and litigation paralegal, I remember I am somebody who has physically bait stamped, evidence. So I know that change does happen in legal practice. It may be, though, and this is the depressing part, when change is broadly adopted finally by the majority of the market, it's no longer exciting because all the novelty has worn off, and the people who had the idea, people who believed in it when it was new, they're like so worn down by the change management battles that the light has just gone out of their eyes. But, you know, that's the nature of change, right? Like, new things are thrilling, but not all the thrills are good. And then by the time everything feels safe enough to adopt, it's not exciting anymore. And then so I think there is that kind of hype curve has an emotional arc to it, right? And then so and now I'm gonna go back to your actual question, like who should be doing that work? I think it is not fair to ask, associates who have 1,800, 2,000, 2,200 billable hour requirements to explore in a vacuum in a directionless way. I think that is, facially nonsense, right? They can't. Um, I think that's why it's so important for leaders to create parameters, create spaces so that people can have mental space, emotional space, and be in the right headspace for exploration. That's why I think programs are really important. I think that's why the correct, and I say correct because there are correct and incorrect configurations for innovation. I think choosing the right configuration is really important to maintain today's success and to invest in tomorrow's success, right? So culture, investment, programming, operations, infrastructure. I think these are all of the components of innovation leadership, and it doesn't rest just with people like me who are consultants who give advice, or founders who are creating new things as I am doing now. And it doesn't rest with people like Ilona, who is, inside the organization driving that change. Ultimate accountability rests with the chairs, the managing partners, the chief operating officers, because they are accountable for how the resources are allocated today. So I think they really need to lean into the challenge of evaluating ideas that they can get from many places and then, creating the configuration that works.
Can we talk a little bit about change and learning? And maybe, Jay, you could describe Meng for us and explain what pandas have to do with social learning and what social learning has to do with AI. And then we can have a conversation about maybe why just dropping licenses for a new AI product into the hands of lawyers is not the best way to effectuate adoption and change the way that we work.
So the picture is of Ming breaking off a piece of bamboo because that's what pandas eat. And Ming is a panda that makes this hilarious, adorable face every time he does it. And he makes that face, and it's very similar to a face we would make when we're straining to do something that is too difficult. And he makes that face because Meng is an orphan who was raised in a zoo with human caretakers. He didn't have panda parents to teach him how to eat. He learned that from human caretakers. And the reason Meng still makes that face every time is because he watched his human caretakers break up the bamboo. And I thought it was such a cute story, and a lot of lessons for us actually made me reflect a lot on the nature of learning. So Ed Sohn introduced me to social physics a few years ago. It's a great book by Alex Pentland, I think. Highly recommended, and the idea of social learning as a construct. So I think Ming's story reminds us that as infants, when you go to the most primal, most basic part of our brains, learning begins as a deeply embodied social process and is so trust based and context dependent, right? Babies start imitating, mimicry. They express themselves by copying what adults do. As they start to mature, that's when they start connecting effort to I think intention and goals, right? And then that's when they start emulating the people they trust, typically adults in their lives. And I think that when we kind of connect the nature of learning, how much trust matters, how much context matters. And we think about maybe how we have been training associates for like over 100 years, how we expect people to learn in the workplace as fully grown, formed adults with their goals, their intentions, and how well are we connecting, the learning that we expect lawyers to do with the goals they have, with the intentions they have, the constraints they have. And then how are we thinking about the job relevance, like immediate job relevance of the things we're asking them to learn? And how are we thinking about the social compacts that, kind of form the boundaries of the trust they have with the partners and the partnership as a whole, right? I think lots of lessons to be learned from Meng. So I hope everybody can see a picture of Meng.
Ilona, anything that resonates with you from the work that you're doing to sort of drive AI adoption and learning, or anything just generally about the profession and the future of change?
I mean, so much to say. First of all, I love Jay's framing. I think I'm going to check out that book. I think there's so much that the broader theme for me is intentionality, right? I think what's happened in the legal profession historically and through now is that we sort of have this apprenticeship model via osmosis, right? So people are learning kind of through the process of hopefully picking up things that they need to emulate. But there hasn't been a true apprenticeship model really in a very long time, right? Unless you get very lucky and you're an outlier. But where mostly people are in their offices, in their spaces, right? Now, increasingly, we are moving to digital. And so there is this sense of, people are in separate spaces, and there's this perspective that it may be harder to learn or harder to, have that apprenticeship model exist. And I actually think that it's quite the opposite. I think that if that's the perspective, then we're not seeing all of the opportunity, because I think the hybridization that we're seeing now and the transition that we're constantly doing from analog to digital in terms of how we're collaborating, how we're working, right? Moving from physical spaces to Zooms and back and forth and having hybrid meetings. There is so much more of an opportunity to do more intentional digital learning, right? And there's great work that Megan Ma is doing at Stanford Law, right, through her lab in terms of agentic approaches to education and agentic simulators when it comes to actual learning, right, on the job, and how lawyers can learn to craft arguments and negotiate and write responses and emulate a certain persona, right, or a style of lawyering. There is just so much opportunity to inject a different level of intentionality into education curricula, right, for legal that we have not done in a very long time, and also embed tech into that learning process. Because now lawyers will have to understand how to interact with technology, right? You will have to learn to talk with AI and to AI and understand its capabilities and how it can be an extension of you. And of course, we haven't yet brought digital agents into the conversation, but agents will be everywhere. And so we should all presume that going forward, we will all be supervisors of both digital agents for sure, right? And maybe other people too. But even at the more junior levels and the most junior levels of our profession, of most professions now, right? Or professional services at least, you will be supervising digital agents in the best case scenario, because they will be doing verticalized tasks in your workflows. And so what does that mean for training, right? So I think that's kind of a big answer to, I think, what is a very big question. But the overall punchline for me is that we have to rethink how we're approaching this, because the process itself is changing so much. And so much of it has that opportunity for the digitalization, right? And the tech embedding and the learning that really just can be so much more exciting, I think.
It's a lot of things kind of lining up at one time, right? Because you're right that the hybridization of our workforces and our collaborations is one factor, but it's and you didn't say this exactly, but I'll say it. I don't think that the so-called apprenticeship model that we've kind of lived on for many decades now, of just assuming if junior lawyers did the same task over and over and over again, sometimes with very little feedback. It sort of depends on who you got paired with, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes you got lucky and got great feedback, and sometimes you got really unlucky and got no feedback. But somehow we assume that, I don't know, 7 years later, by just doing those things over and over again, all of a sudden you'd have wisdom. and you'd be
Yeah.
able to be a strategic advisor. And that, frankly, that's nuts. I mean, that wasn't really the best model. In a way, it's great that the new ways of working are forcing us to rethink that. But it's not only that, right? It's the fact that the business model is clearly going to change because of technology as well. And so that might be the faster or like more urgent motivator for some stakeholder, legal organizations to say, hey, maybe we need to rethink how we can take a really smart, recently graduated lawyer and turn her into a strategist, because probably that big client of ours isn't going to keep paying us to let her do that rote thing for 7 years in a row. So it's a lot of things coming together at once, and I don't know. You guys know the market better than I do, but I assume the second might be more important than the first. There are some others as well. But I wonder, do you think that do law schools have a role here? I mean, I know you guys are maybe not focused on legal education, but Jen and I think about it quite a bit. Do you think that this is a moment where stakeholders across the profession, who usually stay in their own corners and don't talk to one another, right, might think, hey, this is a moment where we need to rethink how we do all of this? Any thoughts about a role for law schools or legal education in what's coming?
My God, so many thoughts. I love this question. I think this is an opportunity for the ecosystem, right? For the law schools, for the future firms who are hiring, for those who are thinking about this more broadly, or advisors, or even undergrad, right? Generally, I think so I was actually talking to someone at Cleary who's about to go to law school yesterday. We were having a session before she heads out, and I was asking her if she knows whether her law school will be using legal tech, right? Will they be using legal AI? And I think law schools should make sure that they're incorporating AI into their way of working, right? The way that they would offer different tools like Lexis and Westlaw. Why not have licenses to, platform-based tools that students can use? Because you would then understand things much more quickly, right? This is a new tool that you add to your tool belt when you're taking exams, or when you're, doing XYZ. And the idea is you will have to embed this as a lawyer. And so why not start earlier on, so that you can sharpen your own thinking and get yourself ready for that next step, and make it less theoretical, make it more practical, right? Understand how to do the right sort of prompting, because legal engineering will become more and more important. We all understand that prompting will become less onerous, right? In the sense that the AI will get better, and so it'll be less specific. But legal engineering, meaning injecting legal expertise into the questions that you're asking and carefully crafting that so that you get the output you're seeking, the expert output, that will be really important.
I have harsh thoughts about law schools.
Let's hear them. Let's hear them.
I think Ilona is absolutely right. I think this is a moment for the ecosystem, and in that, I full-throated support for what she's saying, and I completely agree. But as usual, I'm going to bring kind of an economics market view to the question, and I would tell you that from what I have seen in 10 years of work with law firm leaders, the economics of legal services in the enterprise market, I tell you that law schools are no longer putting out a good product. And I'm talking about the product they offer to the students who are paying tuition. When you think about the price point of a JD in the United States in particular, and then you kind of look at all of the systemic pressures that have been placed on kind of the Langfordian model of education, and then the crevasse system, right? And how much has changed in the world. Like one data point. Last year, 360 billion emails are sent per day in the world. So when you think about the volume of information that is swirling around businesses, and what that does to the nature of lawyering for, some of the world's most complex businesses, and we think about kind of the lionization of, the philosophy that you spent 3 years learning to think like a lawyer and the firms are supposed to train you, I'm not sure that logic is going to hold anymore. So when I think about the opportunities for law schools, I think there is room for, shuffling of the kind of the established order, what I would tell most managing partners in the next 5 years that have never hired out of the T14, I think it is time to start looking beyond the T14. I think that, it is time to start asking about the curriculum at some of these law schools in a systematic way. And I would be willing to go on the record and say my prediction for the next 10 years is that it's going to be a buyer's market for talent. And then so the balance of power already rests with the firms. You look at the most profitable segment of the AmLaw 100, they have the power anyway. But that power is going to shift more and more toward the employer in the next 10 years. And I think that there is really an opportunity for deans of law schools to rethink the curriculum, rethink the value proposition, going back to our earlier conversation that they're offering to law students. I think that it's time for law students also to be looking beyond the vault guide and the T14. I think, but that is also a platform business, right? Law schools connect students, turn them into JDs, connect them to employers. So I think that change has to happen in perception on both sides of that platform. But not to pile on law schools. I think the same about most graduate education. I think most graduate schools in the United States are no longer putting out a good product, and business schools certainly are trying because they have more pathways to offer kind of topical, you know, um, coverage of new things, and business schools are always thinking about that. And I know medical schools as well have to keep up with the advances in scientific research and new biotech, new like pharma and all that. And law schools actually have fallen behind if you look at kind of the highest paid professions, right? I think it's time for that to change.
The other difference there, Jay, too, especially in the medical context, is there is almost a requirement that you be in an operating room or be making rounds to be teaching medical students, as opposed to teaching law, where there is a real divide between practice and academia. But I will say, I don't know whether it's a positive sign or not. There are more first-time law school deans than ever before coming into their positions this September. I think it's a sign of how difficult the job has become, which creates opportunities for more new deans. I think there's also the shortest average tenure on record for being a law school dean. I think now it's under 4 years, which I think is a clear sign as to how difficult the job has become. But I also think, just going back to Ilona's point about how law firms should be driven by what the client's goals are, and that should be paramount. I think Anthropic did a report about which majors, undergrad majors, are using AI most, and it's STEM majors. And I think if you look at how law schools are approaching the use of AI and how many are prohibiting the use of AI, I think if you spool that out and think about how client-centric you can be as a counselor to your STEM clients, eventually, it's just a nonsensical approach to being able to keep up with what your clients will expect from you. So I think it just underscores your point, Jay, of being able to look under the hood of the curriculum and having the market reward schools that are keeping pace. But sadly, we are coming up on the end of our conversation. So I'm going to toss it to Bridget, who has a really pressing question that I know requires society's attention. It's urgent, and we all need to be focused on it. And I know that we need the world's best minds to be thinking about this. So I'm going to toss it to Bridget to set us up.
And the world's best minds are here. So lucky for the world, we assembled the best minds. Ilona and Jay showed up, so we get to answer the question. I want to put a pin in something for a future episode that you guys are going to have to come back, because I want to talk more about I completely agree with the ecosystem moment question. I want us to think about for when we get together again, who could be the convener of all the stakeholders? We've talked about two stakeholders, primarily law schools and law firms, but the regulators, the judiciary, the public, who never gets a voice in how law is effectuated. It is this ecosystem moment, and I wish we had a convener who might say, hey, this is a great opportunity for us to completely rethink how we approach our profession. So pin in that, because that's an entire episode. But I bet you guys have amazing thoughts on that. And it's something Jen and I have talked about many times. Okay, but since I have you, there is a really difficult legal question, kind of a statutory interpretation question, but not really a statute, that divided the appellate Twitter community for a long time when that was a thing. It's not much of a thing anymore, but and the question is, and I'd like your take on it, each of you, is a hot dog a sandwich? I mean, think about it. Is it a sandwich? And you can use whatever methods of statutory construction you favor, and give me your best answer.
Ilona, do you have a firm position?
I do.
Okay, I have a firm position as well. You go first.
I think it has to be, right? Because it is something between two slices of bread. So I think a hot dog is a type of sandwich necessarily.
Okay, I'm gonna take the other side. I think it's not a sandwich because the sandwich is stuffed between two slices of bread and the bun is hinged like a taco. So I think it is a completely different category. I think they both belong to the handheld meal category, but the bun is connected, guys. It's one piece of bread.
So this is exactly the divide in the smartest appellate lawyers in the country at the fanciest appellate firms. You guys just hit on both sides of the argument. You can keep thinking about it. Jen, do you have a vote?
Wow. I mean, I had not put enough thought into it. And now two of the smartest people I know are split. But you know what? It helps end on a note of optimism for lawyers. I just feel like there are so many questions that will keep lawyers busy for all time. And this is just the perfect example, right?
And next time we have to look at that dress and see if we think it's white or it's blue.
It's
So-
blue. It's blue. Obviously.
What do you
Obviously.
think, Bridget? Is a hot dog a sandwich? You are the jurist. You get the final call.
I am on record as taking the position that a hot dog is a sandwich. I came down where Ilona did. I feel like, but Jay identified the one weakness in the argument, but I don't understand how something that's in between two sides of bread isn't a sandwich. Jay, of course you're right that they are both handheld foods, but that's everything. Like, what's not a handheld food? I mean,
Steak, spaghetti.
soup could be. Soup is not.
Oh.
Soup is not. Yeah.
It is not.
Yeah.
Soup is not.
Yeah.
I have had pasta that's been breaded and fried into a triangle so that it can be a handheld food.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's right. Only soup is truly not.
Wow, this was such a party, as I knew that it would be. We're so grateful to you. And as Bridget said, we have to have you back for a future episode to imagine a stakeholder convening to try to bring together all these disjointed groups that should be thinking about the future of legal education in particular. But for now, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and thoughts about a changing industry. And we look forward to seeing our audience on the next edition of AI and the Future of Law. Until then, stay well.